All right, this works. Thank you so much for the intro. This is a perfect audience for a first-time talk I'm giving, which is how does user consent get had in Web3, and specifically the UX of consent and the way in which permissions basically are all around us. So as an intro, I am Henri. I'm one of the co-founders of Privy, and this is something we spend a lot of time thinking about, so I'm excited to chat about it. I'll start by talking about why I think this is insanely relevant to the work that I do on a daily basis. So Privy is a tool maker. We build onboarding tools so you can get any users on chain very easily, regardless of whether they're very new to crypto and they have no idea what crypto is, or they're very deep in the weeds. And I think our point is a user is a user regardless of how they come in, and that means being able to onboard them in a way that's most natural to them. So we build embedded wallets, we build connectors, and we build basically a user management tool behind them, and it's up to apps that use us to sort of mix and match these in the way that fits the user experience that they want to build the best. And so accordingly, a lot of our work is about abstracting away complexity on behalf of users. And here I'll just kind of show it. Users come in all shapes and sizes, and we think it's really important to meet them where they are. So there are 3 screens here. One is from a fantastic app called Blackbird, which is building a restaurant loyalty program. Whenever you check into a restaurant, you can tap your phone against a puck, and you can basically earn rewards in the form of Fly and an NFT showing that you've been here. The second is from Zora, which makes minting assets insanely easy and helps creators basically get their art on chain and their creations on chain. And the third is from Hyperliquid. And the maybe thing that all of these folks have in common is that we have worked with all of them in order to enable very sort of natural UX for their users. But obviously the UX that you expect from somebody coming in to trade perps on chain and somebody coming in to eat at a restaurant is insanely different. And so the question for us is, how do we make sure that in spite of this sort of mantra, user's a user, and hopefully all these users have keys, they remain in control of the experience? And so that's, I think, really what permissions is all about. At its core, the question is, how do we get users where they want to go without exposing them to needless complex interactions along the way, with the understanding that complexity is different for any given user. The definition of one user's complexity is part of another user's product experience. Being aware of a multi-chain world is very useful in this world, and it's completely useless in that world. And so we need to build systems that are flexible enough to account for both ends of the user spectrum. So with this, I'm going to talk about 3 main things. First, the core tension behind any abstraction, behind permissioning systems today. Second, what I'm seeing in the space today that gets me very, very excited about the work going on in the permissioning world and sort of abstracting away that complexity from users. And then third, where we go from here, and why I'm so excited to be talking to all of you guys, because I think the work that's being done is insanely important, and honestly very easy to forget about unless you have proper activation energy to actually standardize the work going on here to create a sort of maybe post-chain world is the way I might phrase it. So first, the problem with abstractions. At a high level, abstractions create intermediation. And intermediation, to some extent, implies trust. Trust in a system, trust in a product, trust in an organization. And trust is a good way to mean that things can go wrong. And so you have here 2 screens for MetaMask. On the left is a raw signature format. On the right is a sign-in with Ethereum format. This is a form of abstraction. There's been a decision made here that the important information can be pulled out in this format. And with it, you're drawing the user's attention to particular parts of the signature. So it's a lot more legible, and I think we still have some ways to go. But it also creates risk, because maybe if you're clever, you kind of need to scroll down here. You can tuck away some information under the fold, get your user to approve something they didn't mean to approve, and basically fool them into granting you faulty permissions. So the main point I'm trying to make is, I think it is just a fact that abstractions strip users of some power. By abstracting away the raw metal, you are making decisions on their behalf. And that implies some version of trust. And, why does that matter? Well, there are maybe 3 layers to this. The first is unintended consequence. let's say I give a permission to a system to trade on my behalf with certain limits. Maybe I forget to change those limits, maybe the market changes out from under me, and I end up making a very bad trade because the fundamentals have changed without my intending to do so. The permission system worked as intended, but maybe the permissions weren't expressive enough to get me to do what I actually meant to do. The second is suboptimal outcomes. By abstracting away, for example, the layer below the settlement layer, I'm making decisions as to what the settlement layer is. And maybe there's some MEV searchers in that settlement layer, and maybe I'm exposing my users to faulty prices because they're being front-run. And I'm doing that in exchange for stripping them away from the complexity of having to choose that themselves. So it's a trade-off that they're making in trusting me to make that decision on their behalf. And then finally, probably most obvious and scariest, is malicious behavior. What if an evil app, what if an evil client, what if an evil tool wants to run your users? And what if they basically do some version of pig fattening where they get them to give more and more permissions until it's time to rug, and you can do this all in one go. So I'm saying this not because I think there's no way out, but because I think the tension is constant. And I guess in my mind, it's really important that we embrace the fact that permissions will always be faulty because abstractions will never be perfect. The system evolves. And I think it's a little bit ludicrous to think that we're going to cut to some perfect abstraction that captures both things upstream from us, the apps that are evolving every day, and downstream from us, the primitives that are changing just as fast. And so I think we have to build in a world in which we know that permission system will only capture some portion of user intent. And we have to build the safeguards that allow users to basically get right when permissions fail them. There's probably my favorite piece of writing in computer science overall is this paper called Reflections on Trusting Trust by Ken Thompson. And he sort of talks about how you can never be sure that a program does what you think it does. You can read the source code, sure, but maybe the compiler's injected some hidden bug in there. You can read the compiler's source code, sure, but there's a way you can bootstrap a compiler to sort of auto-inject that bug in an invisible way. And it kind of devolves into, unless you're smelting your own metal or making your own chips, you should not use anyone's software, anyone's hardware, if you don't want to trust. And so I think we're starting off with an insight which is even in Web3, even with trustless systems, you are still picking where you want to give trust. It's just a question of understanding where that trust goes. And I think if we can assume that permissions break down, we can actually build secure systems in spite of that fact. Cool. So I will take a step back for how I think about permissions in helping developers build apps with Privy. To me, it boils down to scope, how much power is given to the system. Interfaces, how do we present options and what options do we present to the user? And escape hatches, what do we do when the permissions break down and how do they escape? And this really plays out on two battlefronts in my opinion, at the very sort of bottom of the stack, which is to say standards, and at the very top of the stack, which is to say UX. I am already long, so I'm going to skip this slide and move to getting concrete. So where are permissions today? What am I seeing that feels like very, very interesting experimentation in the space that allows me to kind of align on where we are? So I'm going to go through 4 cases, basically, of what I think are very interesting experiments around permission systems that kind of show why this is a complex space. And I think, again, these are all systems that benefit from the type of standardization that's being pushed on us here today, in that, at the end of the day, we need standards in order to build trust with users and in order to build systems that can be automated. So the first is Phantom. Phantom has done awesome work as a wallet to try and push the UX of what's possible with an EOA system. And they have this feature called auto-confirm. Auto-confirm basically lets you pick apps. You can go in your settings and you can turn on auto-confirm over here and basically make it that after you approve a first transaction for 2 hours, you don't need to approve anymore. It'll auto-confirm for you while you're on this smart contract suite. They did this, I think, in really cool ways, and there are maybe 4 that I find interesting and worth remarking upon. The first is it's not completely open to begin with. They picked basically 6 partners whose smart contract suites they trusted in order to do this. So this allows them to push the UX forward without taking a risk that some rogue partner basically makes an upgrade to a smart contract. You know, that should feel weird in and of itself, and then runs their user after the permission's been given in a 2-hour window. The second piece is they built in defenses. So they use Blowfish in this case to do transaction simulation on any transaction that runs through and make sure that if anything untoward happens, they basically get to yank the permission immediately and act as an arbiter. And then finally, they default expire the permission after 2 hours. And again, I think this type of scoping, again, not trying to make it a foolproof experience that works forever under every use case, but starting bite-sized, allows us to actually take risks with the type of UX we can present because we're scoping to a pretty known problem space. And again, this is fully opt-in, so it's not turned on your behalf in Phantom, you have to go look for it. But I think it's an interesting view of where the future might go. The flip side of the coin here, which I think is a really interesting comparison, is obviously session keys in AA systems. So here I think ZeroDev, I think they're building great smart account suites, but the reality is a number of players basically are building out session keys with essentially the same promise. They're really, I think, two core pieces. The session keys, one is enabling you to batch transactions quickly so you don't have to make individual clicks, and enabling you to have more sort of complex intents expressed at the smart contract layer. So I look at this and I'm very interested in basically how composable and programmable it is. You're no longer bound by a single company setting up these permissions. You actually have a smart contract suite that anybody can take a crack at and audit that does this for you. But then again, the problems remain whole, specifically around the UX. So this is fantastic from a standards standpoint. UX remains complicated. How do you actually show this to the user? Where does the user go to get recourse if they decide that they actually gave faulty permissions to the system? I think these are all questions that, as we think about permissions in the space, it's really important to think about them as end-to-end problems. Let's not stop at any single layer in the stack. Let's try and play it out all the way to the end user who's tapping buttons on their phone. The third use case, or case for this that I find very interesting, is Farcaster frames. So frames are really an extension of the Open Graph standard that enables simple interactions for folks scrolling through a feed, basically. You can drop something in, and you can interact with complex systems through basically a handful of buttons in a screen. Now, obviously, the logical extension is to try and move them so that they can move on-chain items, so that there can be transactions done through chains, through frames. And obviously, that implies huge danger, because you don't expect when you're moving through, your Farcaster feed or WorldCast feed, as it were, that you click a button to like something and you've just lost the entirety of your wallet's contents. And so the question of permissions here is absolutely whole. We've unlocked fantastic UX, but that UX only comes together if we have a permissioning system that's nimble enough and robust enough to actually sort of make good on this promise of UX. It's very easy to get UX if you don't give a shit about permissions. And it's very easy to lock down a system if you don't give a shit about UX, but getting both right is really important. The three things I'll talk about here that I've been impressed by. The first is the extremely rapid way in which the WorldCast team has been able to move towards standardization. Within a matter of weeks, they basically put out what is now basically a standard that people can comment on. They're basically pushing the standard via a single client implementation of WorldCast, and then hopefully it'll be a standard that's available to every client building on the protocol. And so I think this is maybe an exhortation in favor of BDFLism. I think any protocol builder should probably have a default client that they build with or build for in order to make these trade-offs really, really concrete in user terms. And then, what does this come down to? It comes down to questions of UIs and block lists. This is a screenshot from the actual sort of spec that they put out, talking about how do we actually display what's going on to the user so that they can know what they're doing on chain. Finally, I'm going to show for just a second and a half, I think the most exciting thing that we're likely to do in 2024 on our end is build a global wallet system. So what does that mean? Embedded wallets in Privy today are app-specific. And that was a very intentional decision we made when we launched, which was knowing better UX implies tougher permissions. We were like, let us scope the problem down so that if there are any issues, the spread of damage is limited to a single ecosystem and to a single app. So we've been running the system for about a year. We have really good data on what works, what doesn't, ways in which to improve the UX. And we now feel ready basically to open it up so that if you sign in this example, to Blackbird, but you already have a Frentech or a Courtyard or a Zora wallet, you can actually come in here and get your assets working across apps. I think if you give away interoperability in using Web3, you've kind of given away half of the point of these systems to begin with. But again, this is really complex permissioning work, and in a sense, this is us becoming the policy engine behind the scenes. The one thing I'll call out here, we're doing a lot of what I've called out as liking from other folks for obvious reasons. We're experimenting with select partners on this first to make sure we get it right. We are pushing the most basic capabilities up front and moving towards more complex use cases. We're really iterating here. But through all of this, we know this is going to be faulty. And so the first sort of interoperable feature that we ever launched was key export, which felt like a necessary launch item for us because we know that at some point the system will limit you. One of the advantages you get with embedded wallets, for example, is you are scoped to a given chain. What that means is if you send the wrong asset to that chain, you can't really recover your assets in-app. You need to pop the wallet out and take action outside of the app. And so this is, again, part of the trade-offs of permissions. Inherent in the tool that you're giving a user, there is a sort of implied permission set that you've given them. So with that, I think my 3 takeaways on how to build is, 1, making sure we scope problems down and focus on UX. 2, ensuring we have standards to make sure that these systems are extensible. And 3, recognizing that basically any type of permission, any abstraction creates an opportunity for silos to exist. And so looking both at sort of the inter-permission way of breaking out our silos, but as well as how you pop out of the permission system for the user so that power users can get what they need is really important. With that, I'm going to wrap up. I think the core challenge for builders today building in this space is there's a real draw to minimizing your app, to restricting what users can do in the name of simplification and in the name of better products. But obviously you're taking away from sort of the user's freedom to do what they want with the system, which is kind of the entire point of these open systems to begin with. And so balancing that tension between restricting what your app can do and at the same time going wide, sometimes at the user's expense because you have to show them raw hex code, which no one wants to read, is sort of a big part of basically where I think permission systems come to play. Ultimately, permission systems are the patch between basically the high-level generalistic standard and the underlying product that gets built. I am super excited to say that I'm coming into into Denver probably as excited as I've been about the future for consumer-facing applications built on decentralized rails. It seems clear to me that crypto as a money-moving apparatus is here to stay. But I think it would be a disappointing outcome if that's all it was. And I am seeing more signs of people building for use cases that are more or less financial. I think some of them are very financial, and that's great. And I think some of them are only tangentially financial, and that's good too. And we're seeing just a rate of experimentation amongst builders looking to cater to mainstream users that we haven't seen before. And in a sense, I think grappling with these permission systems and making these problems very concrete is of the utmost importance in actually building value in the space long term, because I look at the sort of development of core protocols. I look at HTTPS or HTTP and Netscape. I look at the basics of cloud computing and AWS, or I look at content distribution networks and Akamai. The way these turned out is because they were built to solve very concrete problems. I kind of like to think sometimes, what if AWS had been built by, say, JP Morgan and not a bookseller? How would internet infrastructure be different today? And so in that sense, it feels really important to me that we actually build for these use cases today, even if our permission systems are faulty and even if they need to be iterated. We should make sure we scope these systems appropriately so that we're not introducing too much risk to the user and they have an escape hatch to break out of these systems when they're too limiting. But we have to build for these use cases today, otherwise we will never be able to build for them. So thank you for putting this on. I think it's awesome to look at the stack in this way, and I'm very excited for us to hopefully help create more standards around the permission systems and designers and embedded wallets. Thank you.